I was serving in a commanding unit of a battalion that was fighting in Gaza. On the first couple of weeks, no one went in, right? So we were just sitting on our asses, essentially looking at screens, essentially the drones going above Gaza. You just go through those channels and you look for those buildings just falling. It feels like Netflix, it feels like a video game for the first couple of days. But there is a moment you realize it's a freaking actual house.
Channel 4 News in the UK has consistently done fantastic coverage of the ongoing war in Gaza. And just recently, they spoke to an IDF soldier who very clearly has taken part in the war and seems to feel a tremendous amount of guilt for his role and for doing so. So while some Israelis fought conscription and served time in prison to avoid taking part in the war, the man that we're about to hear from, who goes by the pseudonym Jake, decided to join the war effort. He was furious, understandably so, after what transpired on October 7th, and he wanted to play his part. But he soon realized that there were issues with how the war was being carried out. Here's more of what he had to say.
It feels like Netflix, it feels like a video game for the first couple of days. But there is a moment you realize it's a freaking actual house. It just got completely destroyed. And I don't know, but there probably were some people in there. Maybe they are terrorists, maybe they are not, or Hamas, whatever. But you don't know. And then you start asking yourself, are all of those strikes, airstrikes, necessary? Or are we just having a light hand on the trigger here? And then it starts, and once it starts, it never stops. A lot of people are happy to see that we're paying back. That's like the Israeli retaliation.
And was that because they were convinced that they were hitting Hamas fighters, you think, or it went beyond that?
A lot of them don't draw the line between what we call militants or terrorists and what we would call civilians.
Look, I totally understand people who hear what this man is saying and understand that he played a role in some of the brutal acts that have been committed in Gaza, continue to be committed in Gaza. But the reason why I'm showing you what he has to say is because it pours cold water on the notion that there are no intentional targets of civilians in the Gaza Strip. Like clearly what he's saying there, as someone who not only served in the IDF, but served in the IDF during this current war, he is admitting that there is this effort to engage in, retaliation, in collective punishment. There is a complete and utter disregard for civilian lives. And so when people pretend to be offended by any claim that IDF soldiers are intentionally targeting civilians, just understand that is not a statement that's just made out of nowhere. We didn't pull it out of the air and completely make it up. It's based on video evidence of Palestinians waving white flags and then the IDF shooting and killing them. I mean, there's so many of those videos. We've covered some of them on the show. And now we have an IDF soldier confessing that, yeah, there are instances where civilians are targeted. But what about the kids? That's something that I'm always very curious about. Are there instances where children are intentionally targeted? Is there actual disregard for the lives of children in Gaza? Well, let's hear what he has to say. This is his perspective.
Was that quite a widespread view that everyone in Gaza is complicit?
Very much so. For many of the people around me, that was the thing. It came from saying, those are the kids that we spared in the war in 2014, right? Those are the kids that we spared then are now the terrorists that did the 7th, right?
So the implication there being, if you kill a kid now, it's okay.
Everyone, yeah. That was, I don't want to say the majority, but it was alarmingly widespread in the people around me talking about this.
Pausing here to deliver some honest truth as we do in our news coverage as well. TYT is facing challenges, guys, as the entire industry is. You know who could make the difference? You. If you hit the join button below, it's gonna make all the difference and keep us in business. We appreciate you, thank you.
Alarmingly widespread. And so this is, again, the perspective of someone who has been part of this war, who has experienced what other soldiers were doing, the mindset of Israeli defense forces as they were confronted with situations in which you have a high number of civilians, and attempting to take out a Hamas militant could mean the deaths of dozens of civilians, and they'll go for it. And the reasoning is kind of amazing, right? The reasoning is, oh, well, yeah, it's a child, but that child is gonna grow up to be a Hamas terrorist anyway. So like the justifications they have in their own minds about slaughtering kids. And we keep hearing from the Israeli government whenever there are clear instances of civilians being targeted, and they'll say, we're gonna investigate it, or they'll say, we're gonna hold those responsible for these atrocities accountable. But then when you have the Biden administration very mildly saying that they're going to sanction a few soldiers who engaged in bad behavior, or a brigade that engaged in bad behavior, carried out war crimes, for instance, what does Netanyahu do? He has a temper tantrum about it. He doesn't want any punishment for them. He wants to ensure that the weapons that we're sending to Israel can be given to the very soldiers who committed the very clear war crimes. So it's hard for me to believe anything that comes out of the Israeli government's, any statement that comes from them. It's hard for me to believe it, because they say one thing, and so does the Biden administration. They say one thing, and then video evidence shows you something entirely different. The policies implemented or the lack of punishment carried out against those committing the war crimes communicate something entirely different from the rhetoric that we hear from Netanyahu or from Biden. And there is another horrendous, terrible update involving mass graves, and I wanted to get into that a little bit. So this interview with the IDF soldier comes as the United Nations is calling for an investigation into these mass graves that have been discovered at 2 hospitals that were besieged and raided by Israeli troops in Gaza. This month, for instance, health workers in Gaza exhumed 381 corpses from mass graves in and around Al-Shifa hospital after they said Israeli forces killed hundreds of Palestinians and left their bodies to decompose during their 2-week siege of the medical complex. Remember the lengthy debates about whether or not, Israel would ever bomb a hospital? Like, it's just, what a joke. Anyway, a mass grave of 324 bodies was discovered this week at the Nasser Medical Complex in southern Gaza, or the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis, by Gaza civil defense workers following the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the area. So there are signs that the individuals or the bodies were, the people were executed while handcuffed, including some of the medical workers from the hospital. I've seen images of the handcuffed corpses. I can't show them to you on this show for obvious reasons. We'll get demonetized entirely. But those images are out there and they're awful to look at. Now, Colonel Yemen Abu Suleiman, director of the civil defense in Khan Yunis, alleged that some of the bodies had been found with hands and feet tied, and there were signs of field executions. We do not know if they were buried alive or executed. Most of the bodies are decomposed. Now, family members of the deceased claim that they had actually buried their family members individually at the Nasser hospital complex as a temporary measure until they were able to go back to the area. They were evacuated by the Israeli forces. They first bury their family members' bodies individually. They leave and wait for the IDF to evacuate so they can come back. Well, when they returned following the withdrawal of the Israeli troops, these family members claimed that they found that the bodies had been dug up and placed in a mass grave. Now, interestingly enough, the IDF concedes to some of this, but seem to think that there's nothing wrong with what they've done. I'm gonna give you their statement verbatim. Quote, during the IDF's operation in the area of Nasser Hospital, in accordance to the effort to locate hostages and missing persons, corpses buried by Palestinians in the area of Nasser Hospital were examined, meaning they dug the bodies up. They also added that when the examination was done, exclusively in places where intelligence indicated the possible presence of hostages. So they dug up graves looking for hostages. And then they claim, no, but then we returned the bodies to their place. They want us to believe, get a load of this. The IDF wants us to believe that they then, after digging up hundreds of graves near and around the Nasser Hospital complex, they then returned each individual deceased body into individual graves and then patch them back up. You guys really believe that? Or do you want to actually believe what the family members said they found, which is, the mass grave situation? It's really hard to stomach. And so when you see the anger and the rage that's being, shown on college campuses across the country, yeah, there are some people saying stupid things or engaging in dumb chants. Okay, I 1,000,000% concede to that. I do not believe they're representative of all the protesters, and I do believe that the protests are expressing righteous indignation and anger over what our government has been willing to greenlight and support and provide cover for. It's really difficult to stomach this, and everyone wants us to believe that this isn't happening. The media has done some decent reporting on this. CNN even has done some decent investigative reports on some of the more controversial issues that have risen from this war. But overall, considering how the media has covered the student protests right now, they would have you believe that is the most important thing. That is what we should focus on, and we should just assume that all of those students are hateful toward Jewish Americans, Jewish people. It's just the effort to conflate anti-Semites with the demonstrators is pretty gross. And I think most people who have open eyes, open hearts, open minds can really see what's going on and accept it for what it really is. But don't let anyone distract you from what's really happening in Gaza, because this is it. This is what's happening. And luckily, we now have IDF soldiers who are willing to speak out against it.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.